Welcome to our conversations about Saint Angela and her spirituality, as it is kind of demonstrated in the book, also in your midst. At the beginning. Anyway, this is the beginning too. We have a series of conversations about Saint Angela and her charism and her spirituality. And each week that we meet, we will have a different group. Some repeats, some, and some of them it's entirely different, new group. But these are all people who know something about Saint Angela. So we will have a conversation after I say some things, and that's how we will end our session. And I'm thanking all of you all for being here, because anybody who gives up a Monday morning in vacation time to talk this way has got to be a hero, and I'm very grateful. Or maybe I'm getting you out of something, I don't know. Anyway, maybe you could introduce yourselves and say something about yourself.
Sure. I'm Amy Olson. I'm Director of Mission Effectiveness, and I'm also an Ursuline Associate.
I'm Jenny Schaefer, and I am the Director of the Angela Merici Center for Spirituality.
And I'm Lisa Steiner, and I head up our social concerns, and I'm also an Ursuline Associate.
And I'm Martha Buser, I'm an Ursuline sister. And I'd really like to talk about St. Angela. Now, we're going to talk about Angela, women, and hospitality. Not necessarily in that order, kind of all mixed together, but we're going to kind of cover all of that. First thing I want to do is talk about Angela, who was a woman who straddled the 15th and 16th centuries, high Renaissance in Italy. She was born, we're not real sure when, so it's always kind of iffy. It's 1490 or maybe 1494, or who knows? We do know when she died, kind of in the mid-16th century. And she was born in a family with 4 children, 3 boys, 2 boys and 2 girls. There was a boy first, and then Angela's sister, whose name we don't know, and then herself, and then a little boy whose name we don't know. The only one in the family whose name we know is Angela's, and her father, who was John. They were born, she was born in a little lake town called Desenzano on the shore of Lake Garda, which is the largest lake in Italy. I always thought we were talking about, Lake Michigan or something. No way. It's rather, when I first saw it, I thought, this is the largest lake in Italy. Try to get that in your head. But it's beautiful. It's kind of like a spoon. The bowl is at the bottom, and the handle goes up into Austria. And Desenzano is right at the tip of the bowl. So there's a big stretch of Lake Garda, but you don't really see all of that because it is not a terribly wide lake. But it's very beautiful, and there's still fishermen villages, mostly, but there's still trade that goes along all the little villages along the lake. So that's the kind of town she was born in, too. We don't know where she was born exactly, though there are some thoughts that there's this building that looks kind of like an apartment building that the family apparently lived in. But Mr. Merici was not a poor man. He was a landowner, and anybody who owned land was not poor. So he was a farmer, and he moved his family from there to a little area called La Grezza. La Grezza is not a town. I don't know what you call it. It's an area out between Desenzano and the next village. And that's where they had their farm. And so Angela grew up on a farm with her brothers and sister. Because of the times, folks did not know much about hygiene and the importance of being clean. and not having rats and mice, mosquitoes. The house wouldn't be what we would say dirty, but it was open. It had a dirt floor. Oh, we know what it looks like. It's still there. That's the farmhouse. There's like a semicircle of houses, only they're all connected. So I don't know what you call that. Maybe you could call them townhouses. I don't know. Call them what you will. They were farmhouses connected. And theirs was at the end, either the first one or the last one, depending upon how you look at it. Anyway, it had a dirt floor. It still has a dirt floor. And a very large fireplace and a well, which is interesting because that means they had indoor running water. And that's really exciting, even though the floor was dirt. Upstairs, there's a room, a small room, and that was the bedroom. Everybody slept in the same bedroom, and everybody slept on the floor. That always shocks Americans when they go into that room and see a mat on the floor, and that was Angela's mat. Well, we don't know if that was Angela's mat, but they probably all slept on mats because that was pretty common. She died in a bed. Now that one we know, but she didn't live in a house where there were beds, so far as we know. Education-wise, Angela was well educated for her day. Her father used to gather his family and read to them. And he had somewhat of a library. He had the lives of the saints and the scriptures. And he read to them from those two books. Whether he had other books, we don't know. When Angela died, she had more than those two books. But we don't know if her father had that many books. But anyway, so she learned how to read from her father, and that was a whole lot. So she was not illiterate. Apparently she didn't know how to write, though, because we don't have anything in her handwriting. She had, of all things, she had a secretary. His name was Cosano, and she dictated her rule and anything else she had to say, and he was the scribe. That's an historical fact. That's not a myth. Anyway, so she lived there, and they grew up on a farm, and the children grew up on the farm, and farms were small. You might think of a city block with a sidewalk all around it. That was the farm. That's all the larger they were. And we don't know what they grew. Wheat, maybe? Whatever else. They did have a vineyard in the village. Everybody kept the vineyard together, so it was not on the farm itself. Now, they grew up in a time when there were very interesting laws, one of which was you were not to pick up the sticks around twigs and whatever. And you think, now you have to pay kids to do that. But see, that was their source of firewood. So they needed those sticks to start a fire in the fireplace. So it was against the law. I think that is so funny. And then other thing they weren't allowed to do was cut through the yard, or I think of it as a yard, but it was the farm. You couldn't go through somebody else's farm. Cut corners from sidewalk to sidewalk, so to speak. Well, apparently the Merici kids were pretty normal kids, because today, and I just can't believe they still have those records from those days. It shows these Merici kids, not Angela, but the other kids were fined, or they got in trouble with the law, and their father was fined because so-and-so ran across the yard. So-and-so picked up sticks that didn't belong to them, and somebody in the family picked grapes in somebody else's vineyard. And of course, you couldn't do that either. So, but Angela's name never appeared in the list of the naughty ones. I don't know if she was, I don't know the reason. I don't think she was a goody two-shoes. She doesn't come across like that. But anyway, that was the fact. As was common in those days, because they did not know about medicine and how to take care of yourself. There were many epidemics. We call them epidemics. Even today, we have thousands of people who die of the flu every year. So periodically an epidemic would go through an area and many people died. So in Angela's life, there was an epidemic. It was not the bubonic plague or anything like that. It was an epidemic. And both of her parents died, and her older brother and her sister. Now, they didn't all die in the same epidemic, but before she was an adult, those people had died. The death that really, really affected her was the death of her sister. She was very close to her sister, and because her sister's name appears in the records that she was kind of naughty once in a while. This always strikes me as, I don't know, amusing. Angela worried about her that maybe she wasn't in heaven. So you have to keep that in mind. Because we do talk about Angela's vision, and that comes at another time. But anyway, she worried about her sister. Then, as she was growing up and her family had all died, she and her younger brother went to live with her uncle and aunt. Their name was Biancosi. And they lived in another village along the bowl of the spoon called Selo. We always called it Selo until we found out that was a dirty word. We did not know that. So the first time we went to Selo, do you know that?
I did know that, actually.
I don't know what it means, but don't tell me. Anyway, the first day we went there, and there were Carmelite fathers who ran a retreat center, and we told them we wanted to go to Selo, and they all kind of backed away and smiled behind their head. But you don't want to say it that way. It's Selo. Anyway, so that's where they lived, and her uncle and aunt Biancosi were wealthy people, and it was a different strata of society. So Angela learned to do all the things that ladies learn to do, like sew and cook and not tend house, but oversaw the housework. It was an entirely different milieu for her. Then besides that, one of the greatest things that happened to her in her lifetime was that she met the Franciscans. Right across the lake, or out into the lake from Selo, is a little island, and there was a Franciscan friary there. And so she met the friars there and became a third order member. And that was very important for a couple of reasons. Number one, Franciscans are missionaries. And somehow that contact with them broadened her view, her understanding of the world. And that is very important for us today. Because while she came from a little backwater town to start with, that was not her mentality, because she had been exposed to the whole missionary world. The missionary world at that time was really growing. This was the time of the Jesuits and Francis Xavier and all those folks who went as far as Japan and other lands, so they were somehow that was in the air, that kind of adventure. So that was important for her, but Franciscans also fostered in her the gifts of simplicity, joy, and hope. Those are so important to remember. Simplicity of life, joy, and hope. She was always a woman of joy. Okay, so that's Angela. Now, she had a lot of friends, which says a lot of things about her, too. But obviously, if you have a lot of friends, either you have a lot of money and you're attracting people that way, or you are a happy person and a joyful person with a joy that attracts. So she had a lot of friends, not just in her own family and neighborhood, but when the Franciscans sent her to Brescia, which was a much larger town, she attracted a lot of people there too. At first I thought these were all old men that she became friends with, that they kind of, adopted her, took care of her. not so, they were all young men. By the time she went to Brescia, she was in her 40s. These fellows were in their 20s, just starting families. I always think that's interesting, whether she was then like a mother figure to them. But anyway, so she met all these people. There was an organization called the Divine Amore, Holy Love, the Divine Love. It was an organization of men. The hierarchical church was absent in their day. There were priests, but bishops were pretty scarce. Occasionally, a bishop would come in, collect the dues from the parishes, and you'd never see him again. So there were not many members of the super hierarchy around, but there were a lot of priests, especially Franciscans, were around. So, but they asked her to go from Silo to Brescia. It's about 50 miles, I guess. You can get there on the bus. And when she got there, her task was to bring comfort to widows. There was a war going on. There were always wars going on. Italy was not a nation, but there were city-states like Milan and Venice, Florence, a number of the large cities were like, I guess you could call them provinces, I don't know. They were always fighting with each other. So there was always a war going on. Then there was the French who were invading Italy, and so there was always, international wars, and the French disease, which was another name for syphilis. They didn't know what to call it, but because it kind of followed the camps, they called it the French disease. I don't know what the French called it. They probably called it the Italian or the Venetian disease or whatever. But anyway, so there were a lot of widows and there were a lot of poor people. And Angela was open to being with them. The Franciscans did not tell her to do any of that. They just kind of put her there, told her to go there, and she did all the things that she could. Some people want to call her a nurse. You can call her a nurse if you want to. Some people call her a teacher. Well, you can call her that if you want to. She surely talked to the kids. But whatever she did, she brought comfort. And then she got to know women better, because besides the men who belonged to the Divino Amore, they built hospitals and things like that. Besides them, they had wives and daughters, and so she got to know them. She had some wonderful friends whose names just trips off the tongue. They're so beautiful. One of her best friends was by that time she was a Franciscan Third Order member. She met a woman who was a Dominican Third Order, and her name was Osanna Andreazzi. Now, isn't that beautiful? It's music to the ear. Osanna Andreazzi. Now, she died, and Angela went to her, shrine, because if you don't know this about Italians, they have a great devotion to the dead and to the bodies of the dead. So there were a lot of shrines to people who were considered holy people. And Osanna was a holy lady. So there was a shrine there. So Angela went there on pilgrimage. She was one of her friends, one of her closest friends. There was a lady named Ippolita. I like that name too, Ippolita. And her last name would have been Gallo because her brother was a good friend of Angela's, Agostino Gallo. But Ippolita became one of Angela's close friends. And there was a woman named Elizabeth Prato, or Prato is probably the proper pronunciation, but she was her best friend, Elizabeth, who never joined the group. But they were very good friends. They were fast friends, and because Elizabeth was a very wealthy widow, she knew that Angela was gathering people around her, women, and so she I don't know if she had it built, but she lived in a beautiful home on the square. The square is still there, but during the Second World War, a lot of that was demolished. So the building that this room was in, we always called it a chapel, but it really wasn't. It was a room in Elizabeth's home, and she gave it to Angela for her use, and it became a holy place for the company as it accumulated. And so Elizabeth had painted on the walls, at Angela's wishes, the pictures of some very important women. And so it kind of gives you a feel of what Angela was growing into when you think about the women whom she chose to have painted on that wall. One of them was Paula of Rome, and she was a wealthy woman, and her daughter's name, I think it sounds like an ear disease, Eustaquia. So it was Paula and Eustaquia. And they did the church a great favor. They took care of Saint Jerome, who was a bit of a, from what I read, he was a bit of an oddball. And, he needed somebody to make sure he got fed and clothed and whatever. And that's what Paula and Eustaquia did, that kind of ministry that they had. So Eustaquia was not married, but Paula obviously was. And then there was Saint Elizabeth, the one of great fame, who, had a robe full of roses because they wanted to know what she was doing, and she said she was feeding the poor. And so they made her open her cloak, and it was full of roses. And said about some other saints too. But Elizabeth was also queen, and she was married, and she had children, and she was a Franciscan Third Order member. So that was another connection. Of course, there was Saint Ursula, who was the patron of young women, because she and her 10,000 virgins were martyrs. And we always laugh, 10,000 virgins, where would they have found 10,000 virgins in the 8th century? But interestingly, during the Second World War, Cologne, which is where they were supposed to have been martyred, Cologne, of course, was bombed by the Allies, and a lot of things were destroyed. And as they were breaking through the rubble, they came across a graveyard. And sure enough, there she was, 10X, virgins, VM. Well, you can translate those Roman numerals more ways than one. But so instead of having 10,000 virgins, you had 10 virgin martyrs, which makes a whole lot more sense. Because the story of Ursula was that Ursula was from what we would call United Kingdom now. And her father was either a king or a wealthy whatever. And so he wanted her to marry this fellow, a wealthy prince or whatever he was. And Ursula wasn't sure she wanted to get married. So he said, go ask the Holy Father. Now, isn't that interesting? Just take off from the north, go up the North Sea and come down to Europe and go talk to the Holy Father. I don't know that people can do that today, but that's what apparently she was going to do. So he built 10,000 ships for her, if there were 10,000 of them. So they put 1,000 on each ship, and away they sailed, and they came down to Cologne. They came from Cologne down to Rome, talked to the Holy Father, and he said, stay a virgin. So the guy whom she was supposed to marry was with him. And he was very docile, if that's what the Holy Father said. Okay. But he remained in the group. And they went back up to Cologne to go home. And the Huns, who were barbarians, that's the word they use, vicious men, killed them all. So we have a statue up in the chapel court of, what's her name, Ursula, with an arrow in her chest. this is an aside that shouldn't go in. The arrow comes out. It's terrible. You can pull it out. And it has been known that members of the congregation have pulled it out and hidden it on occasion. I check it every once in a while. It still comes out, but it's still there. Anyway, so we have Ursula over there. Now, she became very important to Angela, partly because of her influence about virgins and martyrdom, that kind of love that led her to martyrdom. In fact, she was very important in her day, and there are many of the universities, University of Paris being one, for whom she was the model or the patron of those institutions of learning. So she was always connected with education. I don't know why, but that's a fact. Anyway, so her picture was there. So it's Paula at Eustaquia, and Ursula and Elizabeth, and then one who also is very important to us, a woman who was a scholar, interestingly enough. And she was a beautiful, wealthy woman and very educated. Catherine of Alexandria. She's important to us because her feast day is November 25th, and that's what we call Foundation Day, because Angela took her first daughters and they became a company officially on Catherine's feast day, November 25th. Anyway, so there that many people we know were on the wall. So it's like, she's always connected to women. And then you wonder, how come? What was it that attracted her? They were all different. Some were virgins. Well, many of them were martyrs, but not all of them. And so it's like, there's no one thing that attracted her to those women. But there they were in the oratory that Elizabeth Prato had built for her. So there you got Angela, something about her. And then you've got Angela's women friends. And then that leads me always to hospitality. Because I know men are hospitable too. I don't mean to imply they're not. But it seems as though hospitality is connected to women. Maybe because food is often connected to women, and to, you invite friends in and you have good fun with them, good conversation. So obviously, Angela was a hospitable person. Why else would people have liked her? You are not drawn to people who are stingy and mean, close-fisted, but to people who are open and friendly and accepting of who you are. And where else do you do that so freely except at a table? Because you only invite your friends to the table and you feed them with what you like and with what you know they like. So it's connected to food and friendship. Angela is said never to have drunk wine. I can't imagine a good Italian not drinking wine, but that's the story. So we just leave that one alone. But I suspect she served wine. So there is Angela friends, especially women friends, and hospitality. So I always like to ask people, think about who your friends are, especially your women friends. What attracts you to them, and why is it that you hold that friendship? My best friend was a woman I grew up with. I loved her dearly. She was as close as my sister. We started going to school together, maybe the third grade, I'm not sure, somewhere in there. And so I stayed, we were friends all through high school. She got married. By that time, I was in the novitiate. And scandal of scandals, she and her husband came to visit me on her wedding day. And I didn't think they would let her in. She was in her wedding dress. Sure enough, I got to see her on her wedding day. And so she named one of her children, it's a boy, she called him Marty. She called me and said, I want you to come, I'm dying. I want you to come be with me and help me prepare my funeral. I was stunned, but our friendship lasted all the way through school, into married life, religious life, and parenthood, spiritual or otherwise, all the way to her death. We buried her from the Mother House Chapel, and I got to give a homily. So it was like, friendships last forever, whether you really stay in contact or not. But somewhere there's a place in our heart for all our friends, our women friends, men friends too, but women friends. So I always like to ask people, think about your friends. Who are they? How do you hold them in your heart? How do they hold you in their heart? Because friends, mutual. Friendship is mutual. So there are some questions or thoughts. How are you hospitable? Because I think everybody's hospitable if they're whole people. But people show their hospitality in different ways. And we have talked about that before. I live with an Italian sister, and hospitality means one thing to her and something else to me. But they're both right. My family was very hospitable. My friend's sister always talks about how hospitable her family was. And sometimes I want to say to her, that's only one way to be hospitable. There's more than one way, because it's the welcoming and the friendship and the love that goes between friends that makes them hospitable. Hospitality was so important to Angela that she had this saying, I love the Italian, it's siate piacevole. Be peaceful. Be like a piazza, a place that is open and welcoming. You can come in and go out. You can come in, but you don't have to stay. You go back out. It's in and out, that kind of openness. So be like a piazza, she says. And I always think it means get in touch with your own hospitality. What is yours like? Don't compare it to anybody else's. What's yours like? Okay, eventually we're going to talk about spirituality more directly. We're going to talk about image of self and image of God, image of other people. See how that's all bound together? Because who I think I am has a lot to do with the way I'm going to treat you. Because if I don't like myself, I probably won't like you. It goes that way, doesn't it? But if I'm satisfied with who I am and love who I am, then I'll love you because you're not a threat. That's how friendships are formed. I was thinking about this last night. You know the sign, the infinity sign? It's kind of like that when we talk about eventually Angela's charism. It's not all about loving God, and it's not all about serving other people. It's like the infinity sign. It's both. And they're wound together. You can't do one without the other and have it genuine.
Right.
So we're going to talk about that further, because that is very important. Sometimes I get really squirmy when people talk about doing good things. I get tired of do-gooders. It depends where that comes from. It could be all for me. I'll take care of you because I will really look good. Not so blatant to that, but sometimes it's underneath it. And I could also be holy all by myself. Go on and close the door and not have anything to do with anybody else. Well, I don't know where that would come from either, because I can't really love God and not love other people. It's that infinity sign. Okay, now we'll stop a minute if you want to say anything and talk about hospitality. I know I've got one good Italian here. I know Jenny with a name like Schaefer has got to be German
There's a little
somewhere.
German in there.
Yeah. And I'm not sure about Olsen, but it sounds,
Scandinavian, it's Norwegian.
that's what I thought.
Okay.
But I bet you could all have different kinds of family stories and your own practice of welcoming others. I mean, you're women. And you know what that's like.
Mhm.
You want to say anything about your experience of Angela and her hospitality next to yours? Not comparing them, but part of the same thing.
I think one of the things that draws me to Angela is that she was hospitable to people who others shunned, like the incurables, the people with the syphilis, the French disease, that if I understand correctly, she helped care for them in one of these hostels or hospitals that, and so that, that really caught my attention, and I'm not out there caring for people with incurable diseases, but one of the things that I try to do is make eye contact and smile at people who, like the person in the McDonald's drive-thru or the checkout clerk at Kroger's. People who just normally, I don't think, others necessarily give them the time of day.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things that I think Angela, who are the people that don't get the time of day?
Yeah.
And how can I be hospitable to them? Well, one thing I can do is make eye contact and smile.
Right.
We
We can all do that.
can all do
That's
that.
But boy, a lot of people just ache for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, just that general kindness. I think in my case, of course, food has a lot to do with it. I love to feed people. I think that's something that that gives me joy. But I would say that one thing about Saint Angela that I just really appreciate is that when she talked about being like a piazza, it was like having no strings attached.
Yes.
So loving people and accepting them for who they are, but not expecting really anything in return, not necessarily having any kind of conditions on that love. And I would like to live up to that. That is what I hope to be, is the type of person that can love others as individuals and also without any strings attached.
Yes. I
That's
was
the
going to say,
big one.
kind of to follow up on that, or I would like to be like that as well, but I think she met them where they were. And she wasn't trying to fix them. She was trying to be in community. And I think sometimes there are strings attached to our love. Oh, well, I'll make your life better, or I can do this. And back to what you said, Jenny, I think people just want that respect, and they deserve that respect. And I think we should have reverence like St. Angela did.
Right, right.
Because we are a group of fixers, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
It's like that's how our
Yes.
generosity and all that overwhelms other people want to fix you. You need this, and this, I'll fix you.
Right,
And that comes out of a good place.
right.
But then it's not always self-reflective.
Or does it come out of a good place? Because we need to feel better about it. I don't know.
Right.
Right.
But that idea of loving each person as a unique creature of God, that is very inspiring as well. I think about, I have 4 children, and they're each their own snowflake. I mean, even though they came from the same parents and lived in the same home, they are uniquely different. And I found when, helping raise them, that disciplining them all the same, that didn't work, or encouraging them all the same. They each required something different. And I really take a lot of inspiration from her idea of loving people and seeing them for who they are as one unique creature. I think that's really something to live up to, and it's very inspiring. And I think it also speaks to hospitality. If you have a party, you're not going to just put out food you like, or you're not going to just, make people sit in a room that you're comfortable in. You're going to want to accommodate other people and make them feel at home. And so, similarly, I think that idea of really paying attention to the other is exciting
Yes.
and inspiring.
Yes, and beautiful. Beautiful, precious. And people found that attractive. Because, as you said, we don't meet that everywhere.
Right.
And people hunger for that, whether they name it or not. Something really interesting happened yesterday. You know how hot it was.
Oh, yeah.
Jeanette had gone to the grocery, and when she came back, she said, I just got to drop the food and go. She said, I have to get a couple of bottles of water. She said, I saw a man out on the street. He was lying on the ground. He had a bicycle, and she said he was asleep. And she said, something didn't seem right to me. I gotta go back and see if she's okay, if he's okay. So she left and she was gone quite a while. When she came back, I said, well, what happened? And she said, I gave him the water. He said he was okay, but he was so hot, he just had to quit, get off the bicycle and lie down, which of course was not a real good idea, but the water was good. So she called 911 and she met with such gracious response from 911. She, of course, they had questions like, is he alive? Is he hurt? And some of that she didn't know. They said, we'll be right there, we'll take care of him. Now, that just really touched me. Now, it didn't surprise me that she did that because that's how she is. But somehow she was impressed with how the 911 operator responded to her and to the man who was in need.
Right.
So they were going to come. She said before she got home, she heard the siren of the ambulance coming to see how he was. And hopefully, he was just a little hot and needed some help cooling down. But we'll never know. She didn't know the man's name. She'll probably never see him again. And he never saw her, really. He probably wouldn't recognize her. But that's how love spreads. Like, so to be open to the needs of others, no matter what they are. A kid you meet on the street who needs like a welcoming smile, a pat on the head, or whatever. Is there something I can do for you? So no matter what that looks like, that comes out of heart of love. That's the part of the charism that we sometimes overlook. What's the heart like that all that good stuff's coming out of? What a thing to think about. So, thank you all very much, and we'll get back together. This group may not get back together, but we will continue this conversation
Thank you.
next.
Thank you,
Thank
Sister
you.
Martha.
Yeah.
Thank you.